Hi folks, let's take a look at the role of the schools as an agent or agencies of socialization. We'll begin the process by a little humor from our buddies Calvin and Hobbes. I've also long admired this quote from Mark Twain. Refer to information that you will find on the 10th page of the third study guide, and there's supportive information in chapter 3 as well. Bear in mind that when a child enters school, he or she is no longer considered to be special or unique. He or she is now like all other students, sort of one of the crowd, subject to the same expectations and rules as all other students. And perhaps for the very first time, a child, although children who go to preschool, who go to daycare, have already had this experience, but for some other children, maybe for the first time in their life, they're coming under the supervision of people who are not their relatives. Likewise, I want you to bear in mind that much of this is oriented toward reducing the child's dependency on the family and creating new links to the larger society. Sociologists using the functionalist perspective and applying it to schools as agencies of socialization tend to focus on key functions performed by the schools. The first and most important is what we're addressing right now: socialization, teaching children to become productive members of society. Schools socialize the young, actually teach the young a wide variety of cognitive-based skills, the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and also provide them with quite a lot of information and knowledge on a wide variety of topics, subjects, issues not necessarily available in the home, like physics, biology, history, and foreign languages. Schools also tend to indoctrinate students as to key values within the society of which they are part, like patriotism, like the importance of democratic ideas, like the importance of capitalism as an appropriate system of economics. All you got to do is focus for just a moment on the contents of a civics or political science class you took back in high school, or listen carefully to the Pledge of Attendance. All of what I've just addressed comprise what some sociologists refer to as the official, mainstream, or explicit curriculum. Another key function performed by the schools, the transmission of culture. It's one of the primary means through which and by which you and I acquire more knowledge of our culture. Third, social control and personal development. And then fourth and finally, the selection, the training, and the placement of individuals at different levels in society. Now, in addition to the formal curriculum, or the explicit curriculum, if you wish, sociologists highlight the fact that the schools emphasize a more subtle, a less obvious set of lessons, kind of implicit lessons comprising what's referred to as the hidden curriculum. This might help you with respect to giving sort of a focus as to the hidden curriculum. It's outside the realm of the obvious, okay? And it's comprised of, and by the way, you can find these elements in part highlighted on the 10th page of your third study guide. But this is them presented in a somewhat different way via the hidden curriculum. And again, these are messages you want to remember that are more or less implicit. Okay? They're not quite as obvious, but nevertheless, when you think about it, you begin to recognize, yeah, that was very much a part of my educational experience. Through the hidden curriculum, students learn to respect and obey the commands of authority figures. Without question. They learn to be effective in repeating established or required activities. For example, how much of your own school work has been repetitious? If you're like me, you could probably make the argument almost all of it. Furthermore, as a third element of the hidden curriculum, students learn to be on time, to be punctual, to be neat, to be tidy, to be still, to keep quiet, and not be distracted from their assigned work. Finally, they also learn, via the hidden curriculum, to value competition. Students learn pretty quickly that those who can outdo their classmates are rewarded, and those who can't compete successfully are considered as essentially failures. And this promotion of competition and individual achievement shows up in a wide variety of school activities, like honor rolls, spelling bees, sports. Now, a dysfunction associated with this, sort of a negative side effect, is that students, especially students in high school and college, as noted by some research studies authored by Becker, they may focus more on securing good or high grades than on acquiring the knowledge those particular grades are supposed to represent. Now, by teaching these behaviors and attitudes that are comprised of the hidden curriculum, sociologists suggest that students are being socialized for their later roles as part of, have you got it, the workforce, and a capitalistically oriented economy where obedience, repetition, punctuality, and competition is highly valued. Now, sociologists using the conflict perspective will approach the issue of the role of the schools as an agency of socialization from a somewhat different take, if you will. Okay? They argue that students have different experiences in schools depending upon their social class, their race, their ethnic background, and the neighborhood in which they live. Robertson, for example, notes that conflict theorists often emphasize that the schools tend to reproduce the larger stratification system from one generation to the other. As noted in your textbook, there is a direct relationship between the social class of parents and the educational achievement of their children. The higher the parent's social class, the more likely their kids will go not just to high school, but beyond. In turn, children of working class and lower class parents tend to be eased out of the school system and into the workforce earlier in their academic careers. And again, kids from middle and upper social class backgrounds are much more likely to enroll in colleges and universities. You might want to add something else to this. Kids from middle and upper class neighborhoods are more likely to go to really good schools because their neighborhoods provide a good tax base. The teachers there tend to have more experience, the schools are better funded, and the curriculum offerings tend to be more diverse. There have been numerous studies run by a variety of agencies that highlight the fact that advanced math and natural science offerings tend to be, again, rare, especially in schools where a large number of the students attending are from the lower social class or from neighborhoods with a low tax base per se. Now, another interesting factor that conflict theorists emphasize is that control and obedience in the schools tend to be directly linked to social class as well as race and ethnicity. For example, a lot of studies recently highlight the fact that African American and Latino boys attending schools in lower income public schools are disproportionately punished for violating rules. For example, not raising your hand to speak, when compared to their white and female counterparts. Now, this is something for you to contemplate. Although under the heading of the hidden curriculum, it again notes there's a direct link between how the schools socialize and the social class of the students themselves. Take a moment and study the content of this handout. Now, as you think about what you see here, remember that conflict theorists note that all of this highlights the fact that the schools don't really socialize kids for their well-being, but rather for their later roles in the workforce, where it's very, very important to be well-behaved and, quote-unquote, know your place. Students who are destined for elite or leadership positions literally acquire different knowledge and skills than those who will, again, enter working class or lower middle class occupations. Now, there is something else to bear in mind. Some people talk about what is called the null curriculum, messages that are silenced, they're omitted, or simply not included. Some of these are critical of the mainstream and hidden curriculum. For example, the mainstream curriculum might highlight the fact that Columbus was a strong, brave explorer, opened doors for European colonization in the Americas. The hidden curriculum may carry with it the message that Europeans are or were more advanced and sophisticated than the native folks of the Americas. On the other hand, the null curriculum may eliminate completely that Columbus and his men exploited, dominated the native peoples that they encountered, and that Columbus and his men operated under a European mindset that allowed for the systematic destruction, enslavement, and forcible assimilation and colonization of native peoples. One other thing that I want to highlight before we finish up our look at the role of the schools as a socializer is the influence of student subcultures. Peer groups, especially in high school and colleges, can significantly influence the academic focus or motivation and career plans of their members. Remember, peer groups are comprised of people of approximately the same social background. Now, especially in high school, one's overall take, how they interpret, how they value academics, as well as, again, their aspirations and career plans following high school. Studies indicate they're closely linked to those of their friends. For example, working class peer groups sometimes have behavioral guidelines that might suggest the best thing for you to do once you get out of high school, or even before, is get a job. Now, Cohen did a fascinating study some years ago of student subcultures in American high schools. And he ended up identifying three. Academic, which was comprised of college track students. These are students who made the highest grades. These were the ones that were editing the school newspaper, participating in the debate club and the chess club. The second subculture, fun. These were made up of students who made moderately good grades. You found the most popular kids in this particular group as such, but their focus was on having a good time. The star athletes were here. These were the folks who edited the annuals, school annuals, and set up dances and the like. The third subculture, he gave the title delinquent. And he broke it down into two categories. The hippies, made up of kids from upper middle class backgrounds and middle class backgrounds, and the greasers, made up of kids from working class backgrounds. Now, what he found fascinating about these two microcultures within the larger subculture of the delinquents is that they were all turned off to the message at the school. Most of them ended up dropping out before ever graduating. Now, the kids from working class backgrounds generally had a fairly good set of values that allowed them to secure a job, but not so much so again for the hippies. As I think back about my own experience in high school in the dark ages of the late 1950s, there was evidence for all of these in my high school, but the subculture of which I was a part, you couldn't really fit into one of these. It's almost like it fell between the cracks separating some of these other student subcultures. But here's a question I want you to give some serious consideration to. How did your student subcultural interactions, the peer groups you were a part of in school, did they have any kind of impact upon your own educational experience? What was that impact like? I think if you give some thought to that, you can come to appreciate the role of student subcultures. Next time, we'll look at one other major agency of socialization, the mass media.